welcome to another Pastor to Pastor podcast. I'm Dan Livingston, and we got a really unique and different topic that we want to talk about today that's going to kind of go in a different area of ministry and pastoring that we've been covering. And before we get there, have some very special friends today we want to introduce that's going to join us for this podcast today. And first of all, I better do this first. I'm in trouble since we're on this topic. To my left is my amazing and wonderful and beautiful wife, Cathy, of about to be 45 years. 44 years, excuse me. Well, I was adding that 1 year on there. But 44 years, and been an amazing wife and friend through ministry. And then with us today, you've been with us before, Pastor Robert Pooley, and his amazing, awesome, and all the above wife, Vicki. And today, we're going to talk about a topic that very little talk is going on. And to be honest, it really came out of a retreat that Cathy went on in January for pastors' wives at the retreat center there in South Carolina, Church Creek there, and where we're taking pastors and now taking pastors' wives there for retreats. And when I dropped her off, we were staying at a distal island, which is about 30 minutes away, where I was going to write on a couple books that I'm writing while she was there at the retreat. And I remember dropping her off. And when I dropped you off, I leaned over and took your hand and I said, you're going to be in there with a group of pastors' wives, and they're going to give opportunity for you to be very vulnerable and open so that you can get what you need. And I told her, I said, when I pick you up, I will never ask you what was said. If you need to throw me under the bus and run over me 3 times, do it. I hope you don't have to, but if you do, go ahead and do what you need to do. Because I want her to get everything she could get, while she was there. And I remember when I picked you up and you got back into the car, we began to talk, never asked you what was said, but you shared with me that you heard the cries of many women, several women there, of betrayal and hurt that had been held in for years and not really having a safe place to let it out. And that really sparked this topic that we're going to talk about today, and that's what I call the silent cry, the cry that's being cried, but nobody's listening, and that's the cry of a pastor's wife. And we want to talk about that today, the role of a pastor's wife, the life of a pastor's wife, the struggles that pastors' wives are going through today. And so before I continue on, I'm going to jump over across the table, Pastor Robert. As a pastor, and Sister Vicki, share what on your heart in this area, just kind of right off the bat, what would come to mind?
Well, like you guys, we've been in ministry a long time. We've been married a long time. And over the course of time, like in the early days of ministry, one of the things that I noticed, and Vicki and I talked about it, is that there were times that she felt kind of isolated because we were starting ministry. We were going 1,000 miles an hour. In those days, you wore every hat. There were no church planting organizations or anything like that. You just kind of jumped in and did everything. And so it was very time consuming. And I think pastors' wives kind of during those years of ministry got very neglected. So, now we're starting to feel the course of not nurturing our wives in ministry for a long time. And we're starting to see, you're going to mention some statistics as we go in. We're going to see some of the statistics are so alarming when it comes to ministry and pastors' wives. So we felt, I think, some of those feelings in the early days, some of those things that we would have to work through, times where you probably didn't feel as much even a part of the vision as I did. What do you think?
I think probably in the early days, just understanding that we were blazing a trail for what God was showing us. And so some of the things we were still learning what God was showing us. And I knew that Robert had to have plenty of space to do everything that, God was putting in his heart to do. And so I knew that there would be times that I would be alone quite a bit and hadn't built tons and tons of friendships at that point and had never walked in a senior pastor role before of a wife of a senior pastor. And so it was one of those things where he was kind of blazing a trail, and I was left in a little bit of a plume of his smoke, and just kind of as it all cleared, I was feeling a little bit alone. And so that would be one thing that I would say is just a little bit of that feeling of being alone.
Yeah,
Maybe not neglected, but a little bit alone.
And I think important too, because, in previous conversations that we've had, when you guys got married, you weren't in the ministry was not even in the thought pattern.
No.
It was way out in left field.
Yeah, we weren't walking with God. When we got married, we were far from God. I was a musician. I was playing the bars and all of the stuff that went with that. But when God got a hold of our lives, we jumped into ministry pretty quickly. I did 8 years of music ministry, and then we became a youth pastor at a church and spent that time. And then we planted a church, and then that's been going for quite a long time. So yeah, it was a huge shift for us. I believe you guys were actually already believers, and you knew that you were going to be doing full-time ministry when you got married. It wasn't a shock to you.
No, not a shock at all. We got married in 1980, and he carted me off to the Bronx, New York, and I was able to then watch and observe and learn from some of the other pastors' wives within the church. Had 7 pastors, and we were one of them. And I think mentally, it helped a lot. I feel that it helped a lot, knowing kind of what I was getting into in terms of a pastor's wife. I didn't marry somebody who was actually had a different career, and then suddenly it was kind of thrown on me, So it seemed maybe a little not quite as shocking, So, and then as we moved on to a senior pastor position, then I don't know if I can say this in the podcast, but that was my, how did I call it the other day? My desert, because and it wasn't really, for me, it didn't have anything to do with him pastoring. It was just some different things about it. It was a church that we founded, and all that. So, but it is, there are things that sometimes the men, these pastors, he had to work late hours. And for me, when we first were married, a couple of years later, we had our first child. So I was able to kind of, pour my life into that first baby, and it would be only 4 years later I'd have another one. So when you know how that goes, you have those kids and you can do what you want to. I'll take care of the babies, So it made it a little bit easier. I didn't feel too many times like I did not feel lonely, but also learned to just not really hide myself, but to just get involved maybe with friends, and do things before the kids come along. And then when the kids come along, that's what you do, There may be times when you might feel like a single mama because they are so busy and they have a lot on their minds. He had a lot on his mind trying to pastor the church. But sometimes it takes a toll in that area.
Yeah. And do you feel like, again, previous conversations, this is not the first time we've met, you're very much an extrovert and introvert. And so then you started off completely different, where she knew that we were going to be in ministry. You had no clue you were even going to go to church. And then her ministry started in an environment where there were 6 other pastors' wives involved that she could have relationships with. Yours, pretty much, you're on your own, which I think introduced the comment you started with, in regards to you're like in the dust, following the dust of the wind, trying to go, who am I? Where am I? What am I supposed to do? Who do I, there's really an isolation there, And so it we see a big extreme.
Right.
Which is great, I think, because we're really speaking to an audience of such an extreme of varieties of where pastors' wives are today. And I think the statistics that we'll get into in a few moments really share that. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I think that because our paths are different, that it's good for us to understand that other pastors can be experiencing something totally different than what we've experienced, and we can't base how we minister to them just on our personal experience alone, that we have to really start hearing other pastors' wives' hearts so that we can have compassion for each other and build those friendships and have a safe place where we can share our thoughts and feelings.
Well, that's the question right there too, that safe place, because in what we're seeing, most pastors experience loneliness. Most pastors don't feel like they have a safe outlet. And so Pastor to Pastor was kind of started for that, to give them an opportunity to have other people that they could talk to. Mm-hmm. But for pastors' wives, when you first started in ministry, you had a staff that had 6 other pastors' wives. So you had kind of a wealth of people that you could go and say, I didn't know it was going to be like this, or I didn't know this was going to happen. But then all of a sudden you find yourself in another place. You're starting a church. You're the lone pastor's wife, and it's a whole different experience.
Right.
Yeah. Well, the culture, she was 20 years old.
Yeah.
We had just been married for 3 weeks. We pack a U-Haul trailer in Central Florida. We moved to the South Bronx. We started our marriage and our ministry there. They trained us so that I wouldn't get killed or go to prison. And she, because she's blonde, white hair, she's going to get propositioned like crazy. Yeah. And literally, when we would walk down the streets, me holding her hand, men would proposition her, you just got to keep walking, don't do it. It was a totally different world.
Yeah.
But yet she adjusted like a champ, But so there's a church now of other pastors where there's so many dynamics involved, young, just married, new environment from a little town of 10,000 people to the Bronx, New York, unchurched, unsaved. I mean, so many different dynamics that come with this, but then it all comes back to that theme or that point of what you're sharing with, that 42% of pastors last year said they would leave the ministry today if they could financially survive doing something else. And they said the number 2 reasons, number 1, anxiety, mm-hmm. and number 2 is isolation. They feel alone.
Right.
And then if we look at that on the pastor who has potential Zoom calls to be on with other pastors, retreats to go to, local pastors to have breakfast and coffee with, if those type of relationships are available, but what's being presented for the wife? So if those statistics are real for the pastor that does have other outlets available, there's a wife at home that literally has nothing.
Right.
My cry is if I'm going through something, I can call you immediately or vice versa. And we've done that with each other.
Right.
And we've got somebody on the phone immediately that's like, let's go get coffee and we're not going to quit drinking it until we get this resolved. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're going to be okay before I go home. And that's gold in my life to have you and a few other guys like that. And I know you have other guys too. But we didn't just get there. We had to make that happen.
We had to be intentional.
Very intentional.
And I think that's a thing when it comes to this idea of loneliness, because it affects pastors. I think it affects pastors' wives
more,
way more,
yeah.
Almost double more in some ways. And so there's that idea of loneliness. There's that idea of expectations, like just getting into the ministry and the first part of the ministry. Now, you guys have been doing ministry for a long time. You've been there with us, and we've each got around 40 years of ministry. So you kind of know a lot more than you knew when you were starting. We know a lot more than when we started. But the idea is that you don't know what the expectations are. You don't even know how, and everybody has different expectations of what they expect out of the pastors' wives.
Right.
What was the surprising thing for you when it came to expectations? When you started thinking, I think this is what everybody wants me to do. What was the surprising thing?
I was just actually thinking of one that was kind of funny, is that everybody thinks that the pastor's wife knows the Bible frontwards and backwards.
Oh, yeah.
And that, where every scripture is in the Bible, chapter and verse, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. So I think just over the years of growing in ministry and thinking from the very early days of ministry and being so absolutely terrified, because it was just such a different thing to experience and actually go through, because you can think about it in your mind, but when you actually experience it, it's a totally different thing. And for me, in the early days of ministry, I was very shy, and I had a little bit of trouble just reaching out, because I was just kind of like that. I was shy and kind of kept to myself a little bit, because I am a little bit introverted. But over the course of the years, God has been good to me and helped me find really great friendships. And like you were saying, Robert and Dan, that we need to be more intentional. And so I became more intentional, and God, grew me in Him, and all those things helped. But starting out, it was not always easy. And so there's a lot of young pastors' wives starting out, or maybe even pastors' wives that might be a little older, but just still starting out. And it's all new, and you don't know what you don't know. And so those were things that it was a bit of a learning process.
So you mentioned that when you first got in, you felt terrified. And I'm sure you probably experienced some of those kind of moments too. What would you say to a wife, maybe, and I don't even mean just new in ministry, but they've hit tough circumstances. The church is struggling, the pastor's struggling, the husband, he's struggling, and they're terrified. What would you say to these wives that what kind of action do they need to take when you're terrified?
Well, I think my first thing is going to be prayer, because that's my thing.
That's what I was thinking,
and
too.
everybody, really just pray, make it a matter of prayer, write your Dear God letters. It really helps. I think He's kind of watching over your shoulder when you do it. But that's the first thing, that God would give your husband peace that passes understanding, that He would give him clarity and wisdom.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that God would give even yourself as a princess and a daughter of the Father, the same thing, in words of wisdom. And, that the Lord would just touch the church, and He would let it continue to grow in the way He would have it grow. You can come against spirits too of division, and just learn those prayer languages and the things to come against, so that as they go forward in the ministry, as you go forward in the ministry with your husband, then things to pray for, how to come against certain things, certain spirits, certain things like that, because we have to really not only. One of the things I feel like God is checking me lately is I pray for everybody else and I forget to talk to Him about me. Oh Lord, I need You to touch me today.
That's right.
And that's something that I would definitely advise. And then the way I've always been with Him, or tried to be, is I'm going to tell Him, what I feel the Lord's, to encourage him, words of encouragement. I may go to my room and I may break down and cry on his behalf, but that's okay, because the Lord's going to see you through. You have to just remember those things.
Right.
Good. I like that.
I would also say too, don't forget that God called you to this.
Yeah.
And if He called you to something, He's going to equip you.
Amen.
And it may take a minute to get your footing, but if God called you to it, He's going to help you. And He's going to, as you said, if you're praying, and we really, as pastors' wives, need to be women of prayer, because it is our sustaining, it is our foundation. Staying in touch with the Father and letting Him give us wisdom and guidance and direction for every step and every part,
Right.
because we're going to watch our husbands go through things. Our hearts are for them. We know that God's called them to do it, but they have challenges. And so when we were growing up in ministry too, I had seen other pastors' wives, senior pastor wives, go through things, and I really thought I understood what that position meant. But when I actually got in it, it was a much deeper weight to carry. So sometimes people think they understand exactly what a pastor's wife goes through, and even as a pastor's wife, I can't understand what a pastor goes through, even though I live with him. It's a weight he carries that I can't understand. And there's a weight I carry that he can't understand. And then collectively, we have a weight that we both share together. And so it can be a little bit tough, but we know God will help us.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you feel, because we're talking to such a variety of pastors' wives out there, from young pastors' wives just starting, seasoned pastors' wives, and then we have wives that are supportive roles to the husband pretty much in different ways, and then we have pastors' wives today that are co-pastors. So we have such a diversity, was the word I was looking for, in the role that pastors' wives are playing. And so, when we try to address this issue, there's so many different dynamics involved because there's so many different roles being played. But it all boils down to the fact that whether you're a co-pastor or your supportive role in the home, wherever your major part of your role is that God's placed a pastor there and whether you're his co-pastor or wherever your role might be, the weight of that, as you're saying, the weight of those responsibilities. And then as we're talking today, the additional weight that comes on the wife, because not only is she a pastor's wife, she's a mother and she's helping, the kid. We're fathers too, but we all know that the moms are doing the majority of the role, usually at the home with the kids and a home keeper and, all of those roles. And then having a lot of unrealistic expectations placed upon her by a local church. She's immediately can sing whether she can or not. She can play instruments whether she can or not. She's a great children's worker whether she loves it or not. She can run an awesome nursery whether she's had a kid. They've already got this mental mindset of what you're supposed to do, and they forget that you're a person.
Yeah.
They have all these roles and yet forget that you're a person too, and that you matter, and that your health matters and your well-being matters. And there's so many different areas that are being thrown upon the wife that people don't see because she's not screaming loud because she wants to cover her husband. She does not want to throw more pressure on him, so she keeps it inside. And now we're watching, marriages fall apart. And we're getting calls here at Pastor to Pastor, where pastors now in the ministry 25, 30 years, married 25, 30 years, and the wife has come in, sat down with him and said, we're done, we're through, taking the kids, we're leaving. I've told you, I've given you signs for 5, 10 years, you're not listening, you're not looking, and we're through. There's no counseling, we're not interested, we're done. And they walked away. And so it's really brought us to the awareness of some statistics that we can't ignore. Even when we all found the statistics, we were shocked.
Right.
I mean, it shocked us, and we deal with this constantly. And when the pastor's statistics do not shock me. They haven't shocked me at all. But man, when I started digging in, when this all got in my heart, and started pulling up statistics of pastors' wives, I was just like totally blindsided.
Well, you mentioned marriage, 50%, that's 1 out of every 2 pastoral marriages end in divorce. And that's a scary statistic.
Yeah.
I remember once they asked Billy Graham's wife, did you ever consider divorcing Billy? And she says, divorce, no, but I was almost about to kill him a couple of times.
My wife never felt like that.
That sounds about right.
And I think there's some truth to that. Not necessarily killing, but I feel like there's a place where you get a pastor and his wife and they're struggling in their marriage, and it could be because of pastoral issues, could be because of family issues, it could be neglect, it could be any number of things. I mean, there's a lot of negatives coming against you guys in different ways. What would you say to a pastor's wife who is struggling, and she's struggling in her marriage, and she goes, I can't even go talk to my pastor because I'm married to him. How do I deal with this? What would you say to him?
That's a good question. It really is. And it's a tough question to answer because every woman has different needs, but definitely that she would reach out, that she would not keep everything to herself, that somehow, some way, if she couldn't find someone in the church, that she could find a counselor or somebody. Don't hold it all in because it's going to implode somewhere.
Yeah, I think a counselor is one of the best answers there, too, a counselor. If you have, I think being intentional is one of the great things that we all use that word, to find that right friend that you can share everything with, everything. And, that you can just, a lot of times I've been blessed to have that kind of friend. And, a lot of times maybe I would go to her. And even though she was never married to a preacher, I mean, sometimes they can give you really good insight. And the important thing is with a couple of friends that I've had is I didn't have to tell them this. I could tell them whatever, my deepest whatever, or maybe something we were going through, but she would never judge him. She never fell out of love with his pastorship. Always just loved him no matter what I said. And I think that's another key, because some women, we cut up like, if you hate him, I'm going to hate him too. But, when it comes to their pastor, we have to be real intentional on friends that we choose, friends that we pick. And, and God puts that discernment in us to who maybe we should not be around and be intentional, not be intentional with. One of the things I wanted to interject in on too, with Dan and I'm not sure about y'all, but with Dan and I, one of the things that I appreciate about him, and I find this happens with some pastors and their wives, he did not have any expectations for me. He didn't push me. He didn't preach at me. He didn't hit me on the head with the Bible. He let me be me. And if I wanted to do the children's ministry, I did the children's ministry, and I did. And I can make happy with a lot of things I'm doing, because, I don't want to be sad and miserable. I'm not going to live with my face in the mud. But that is what I do appreciate about Dan. He just he never pushed and prodded too hard for me to meet the expectations of somebody else.
I would say for us, it was probably the opposite. I think I did push. I did everything except hit her with the Bible, but I did push, I did preach, I did all of those sort of things because, I felt that her expectations were also expectations on me. What they were expecting of her, they were expecting, and so there was times that we did that. It wasn't until we'd been in ministry for a while that I learned to be an advocate for my wife and begin to stand up and say, this is this. But there was times where she was involved doing things, it's just like anybody in ministry that has a position in ministry. There's things that you do that you really enjoy doing. There's things that you don't really care for as much, and so she's kind of jumped into those roles at times and fulfilled those roles. But I think in the early days, I was just the opposite, and that I put a lot of pressure on her, a lot of stress, because there was some hesitancy. She was shy. She was dealing with some fear. Is that kind of...
Yeah, I think there was some of that, but also, let's just say we were teasing earlier. If you can sing, you're going to be on the worship team.
Right.
If you can't, you're going to be in the children's ministry.
You're one or the other.
That's right. You're going to be in one or the other. Now, for me, I love children's ministry.
Oh, yeah.
I absolutely loved it. And my heart was always to teach those children the stories of the Bible, so that wherever they were in life, and they heard stories of David and Goliath, and they could apply it somehow in their life, at whatever age. So that was my heart. But the thing is, when it switched from getting to and have to, that made the difference, because then I kind of didn't feel the same amount of joy because it felt pressuresome. Right. And then also, too, I don't know what it is in a lot of churches, and even the biggest churches, it's hard to find people to serve in a ministry. This is our next generation that's coming up, and we need more people to step up to the plate. And if anybody could help in a way in a church to help the pastor and his pastor's wife is to help them do what we need to all do, and that's protect this upcoming generation. Yeah. And so those early days were good and love for the children, but as Robert was saying, some of those pressures, I did feel them. And I would say, and if I'm being honest, there were times I was a bit resentful because it's like, wait a minute. And I had a little pause there. Yeah.
Like, do I have an opinion in this?
Do I have a choice?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Is my opinion on this matter? And then, we go back again to our very beginning, where we came from two different worlds, where she grew up in church, she knew church life. And then when we went to New York, there was already pastors there, so there was children's ministry going. We didn't start a church like you did at that time, where you start with nothing.
Big difference.
And you had no church background to go on. You just jumped in full force. And thankfully today, through organizations that are helping church plant way healthier than you and I, because we knew how to do it wrong, but nobody took the time to organize anything to teach us how to do it right. So we learned from the hard knocks. But so again, we have two totally different scenarios of, if there's nobody else there to do it and it has to be done, we're the ones that started this. Yeah. So we don't have a choice. We got to do it. but it goes back to the power of people understanding their gifts and their talents and their callings to jump on board too.
And also that idea that that's a weight that we carry. And, we keep coming back to that idea, but it's just like, okay, here's ministry for you. It's here, carry this. Oh, and while you're there's nobody to do this, carry this. And you're carrying all of this weight, and you're a full-time mom, you're working a full-time job, you're trying to have maybe a moment where if you wanted to go and hang out with a friend, you could. And it's just all this weight. And I think so many pastors' wives feel that. And it's this constant struggle of, how do I get out of this? You feel trapped.
It's suffocating, a little smothering, in some ways.
And so if you're a pastor's wife and you're looking at your situation and you're feeling trapped, you can't see any way out of it, and there's nobody that's talking about this, then you start looking at it and going, you know what? I know how to get out of this. I'm going to get out of the marriage.
Yeah.
And so marriages are ending at the rate of 50%. You said that you've had a couple of people that you're talking to, pastors, whose wives has just said it's over.
It's over.
It's over.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this is that buildup that just comes over the course of time.
Right. Well, that was my beginning statement, that there's a silent cry.
Right.
That's not being heard because they can't cry loud.
Well, for pastors, they go through somewhere around the 25-year mark for the average pastor is a season of burnout. I think that we've discussed that with church planners that are starting, in the ways that they're starting now, and they're starting big, that burnout rate is coming at maybe the 7 to 10 year mark, and sometimes with moral failure or that sort of thing.
Right.
For pastors' wives, instead of burnout, is it possible that their burnout is just going, I'm going to cut the cord, I'm just going to get out of it altogether?
Well, I think, again, wives that have been isolated. I think wives that are in a community are already looking for solutions. But a wife that has completely isolated herself and has all of this betrayal, hurt, wounds, emotions bottled up, and she has no counselor, no one that she's been venting with, that's her only out that she feels that she has, sad to say. But let's quickly jump in, on some of the statistics and the areas that we want to cover today. We already kind of opened the door for them. So let's look at number one, friendships. A pastor's wife, obviously she's got to be very, very careful who she lets in her circle, because you don't know why they're there. Why do they want to be there? There's so many guards you have to put up, obviously. But here's a couple statistics. Obviously, with time, we won't cover everything. But 80% of pastors' wives feel completely left out and unappreciated by the members of the church. 56% state that they have no close friends in the church. How do you guys respond to that, gals?
Well, that's what I was saying a while ago. Sometimes we have to be intentional. I think God gives us, God gives us a spirit of discernment. So you may have to test the waters. We have to test the waters sometimes, because you'll know right away who you can trust and who you can't trust usually. But I don't give up on society or women when somebody's let me down. I'm just like, let's move on to the next one. But I think it's all in our mindset too. If we allow, I think, the spirit of discouragement to get on us, it's going to be bad. It's going to get on you, and it's going to stay on you if we don't watch it.
Right.
But I've enjoyed over the years my friendships, and I thank God I have chosen some. God has, with His help and wisdom, chosen some that have been really wonderful friends. So I haven't experienced too many disappointments with them,
Yeah.
The isolation and all. But I know a lot of women do. A lot of women, pastors' wives, say, find it very hard to trust people. Maybe they were hurt early on, or not really sure why they would have that issue. But you might can speak from that.
Well, from my experience, I feel like I've always had good friendships, and found favor with people and felt loved and supported for the most part. But there were times when I went out on a limb and maybe shared something a little bit deeper, and then it might come back somewhere later through a source. I knew that there was only one way they might know something. And so then you get a little tentative because you want to be careful who you share things with. And I loved what you said about God gives us discernment. And I love that we have a Heavenly Father that wants to protect us too. And I know one thing, if I was ever in a really tough place, you would be a person I definitely could come to. We have a kindred spirit in the fact that we're very candid people. We share, you wouldn't be afraid to say, you know what, you would shoot me straight and I would shoot you straight. And you really need people like that, somebody that not only can understand where you're coming from, but someone that can also just help you understand it maybe from a different perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
But feeling lonely and that kind of thing, I think it happens in a lot of churches where maybe the pastor's wife doesn't feel loved. Right. And I mean, I don't always feel noticed by a lot of people. That's okay. I'm not necessarily looking for that. Right. But when I've gone through hard times, I know how much I'm loved. And then there are people that do, from time to time, just do things that are out of their way to show it. And those are things that are so appreciated. So we always hope that other pastors' wives have that. But Dan, you said this survey came from the Barna survey.
Yeah, and Shepherd's Voice,
Yeah, and Shepherd's Voice. And so this is a pretty big survey across the board of pastors' wives. Broad range. And so I was totally shocked by some of the statistics on this. But I know that there's a lot of pastors' wives that may not be highly favored or loved, and they're still called to the position that God called them to, whether the people around them love or support them.
Yeah.
Well, if pastors' wives are carrying hurt or pain, struggle in their life, and then somebody comes and they're showing interest in that, there's this immediate fear. Are they just trying to get information about the situation? Are they using me to get to him, right? Yeah. Or, that sort of thing. How should wives handle that kind of situation where they're not sure and they're constantly trying to judge the motives of people, and they finally get tired of it and they just stop, and they do isolate themselves? How do they handle that? Either one of you.
Yeah. I felt early on, a lot of times I could figure it out with particularly women, because, and sometimes it'd be couples. All of a sudden, I could be over here just talking, spilling my guts out. They don't want to hear what I've got to say. They want to hear what he's got to say. He's the pastor and the man of the hour. And I'm not saying that in a critical way. I'm just saying they're the man. That's who they want to hear. And when I see it, I'm like, okay, see ya. Let me find another place to make my friendship, because it's really sad, but it happens when people when people kind of you feel like you're being used to get to him. You feel like you're being used to get a scoop, Yeah. And I'm learning. Take me a lot of time to say, oh, I don't know anything. I don't know anything. They don't tell me anything. And in our case, it's kind of true. He don't tell me a lot of stuff.
Well, if I can interrupt there, it leads into our next area, so we can go right into the statistics, stay on time here, is ministry. And in that, the statistics, when I read some of the surveys, it said that the high majority of pastors' wives felt completely unappreciated, and that they had special gifts. They knew special gifts. They identified special gifts that they had within them, but they were completely overlooked, and that whatever they did, they were inadequate at, because the people saw the pastor as qualified, but never really looked at the pastor's wife as qualified. She's an assistant that's not on payroll. And that's the way it was put in many of the surveys. So here's some statistics with ministry. 84% feel unqualified and discouraged in their roles as a pastor's wife. 80% feel pressured to serve in ways that does not fit into their gifts or their passions. And you mentioned that earlier. That what would you say your response is as we move through these different categories to kind of been covering it really, but in the role of a pastor's wife involved in ministry, 84% feeling unqualified, 80% feeling pressured to serve.
Well, I kind of look at that from two different sides. One is maybe the pastor's wife can step up a little bit and grow in a gift and not be afraid to grow. Because I know God has pushed me a lot to be a little bit more in the forefront, which I'm perfectly happy to be the background person.
Same.
And all these nudges from the Lord to move forward. However, I would say, too, that there were times when I didn't feel qualified to do things, and there is some pressure there, but I just accepted it, I guess, because I just felt like that's what I needed to do, but I don't know if that is really the healthiest thing to do.
Yeah.
It's definitely a time of growth. It's a time of stretching.
Yeah.
And sometimes we need to do that no matter, I think, There's not always somebody in there that wants to serve or learns the idea of serving and wants to be intentional. So I think being that pastor's wife as an example, if you will.
But what if you don't want to? Then how do you handle it? Because then who are we going to disappoint?
Right.
Who's going to say, you really should have been the one to step up to do that? Or it's like somebody has an idea for a new ministry and you're it. And it's like,
oh, no, I'm not. That's where I feel like he has come in a lot, and you may have, because Dan, he's always been kind of like I don't know how to express this. He's done this to me and the kids. Like, he would protect us from that kind of stuff.
Right.
Like, oh, no. You do what you feel to do. And if you feel to do it, then you do it. And I'm like, well, I don't. Or I do, depending on whatever our heart feels. And I thank God for that, for him to be that way. And so I think maybe some of the pastors may need to kind of take that as an example and a rule with your bunch. If just because it pops up doesn't mean it's time for you to do it, the pastor's wives,
Right. And if the push is too hard, the pastor's wife is going to feel resentment.
Oh, yeah.
And that's going to come out in a lot of different places. Mm-hmm. It's going to come out not only in the resentment to maybe some people that approach that subject with them, or even in a marriage, it comes out.
Yeah.
And it's like the thing we need most is for us to be as healthy as we can, so that everything that comes from our ministry is as healthy as possible. So we don't need any resentments or things between us, that we stay healthy too. And one thing I would say, too, is that in our times of ministry, we have had to make time for each other, because there's just never time. We could fill every single day with something. And finally, I just said, hey, we have got to have some time for us. And Robert and I together made an agreement that we were going to set up a date day, that one day a week we were going to have a time to reconnect. Because if we didn't, we were going to start losing each other. And we did for a little while. And that's where divorce happens, is when people, it's not infidelities or things like that necessarily that break up a marriage, but it's never having time, never even feeling like you're on anybody's radar.
Right.
Because there's so many demands. People always need something. They're always going to need something.
Always.
But we need something too, and that's we needed each other. And that was one of the most valuable things that we did. And to this day, through all these years, we have kept that.
Right.
I'll be very candid, because we hit a point, this is back during the youth ministry days before we planted the church we were in now, but we hit a point where we just felt like roommates.
Yeah.
I was going one way, she was going the other. We were just busy all the time. And we would see each other, and it's kind of like you're just sharing a house. And finally we came to the point of going, we're not sure this is going to work out. And we thought it was over. We didn't say it was over, but we thought it was over. And
we got to the edge.
We even went to our pastor and said, we're struggling. We're not sure how we're going to make it here. And they immediately got us with a counselor. Made a huge difference. We worked it out, and that's where we began to put proper systems in place, proper ways of learning to relate to each other, taking that time to spend time together, to pray together. One of our favorite things, we did it yesterday, is we live in a beach community. We get down on the beach road and we'll travel along and we'll stop just several times. At one point we'll do communion together and all that, but we'll spend time praying through what's going on in our life right now, the pressures that we're facing right now. It opens up some great conversations. When we get those opportunities to get out of town, and I can say this to every pastor and pastor's wife, you need to see your town in the rearview mirror.
Absolutely.
Every now and then.
Agreed.
You just got to get away, spend a little bit of time away, take the pressure off, trust your staff. They got it. It's going to be fine. It's not going to fall apart while you're gone for a week or 2 weeks, and have that time to reconnect, remind each other of what you're doing, have the real conversations where all the masks are off and you're digging into it. And it's going to make a difference. It's going to make a difference in your marriage. It's going to make a difference in your ministry. And it's going to keep you together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Agreed.
And, as we get toward the end of this, it goes right into the area we want to go to next, and that is on the pastor's marriage and the wife. And, 80%, if we look at it, 80% of pastors' wives believe their spouse is overworked. They spend too much time at the church, involved in everything. 80% wish their spouse would choose another occupation.
80%. Right.
Wish their spouse would choose another occupation other than pastor. Listen to these. 40% of the husbands have had an extramarital affair while serving as a pastor.
That's the one that, all three of those statistics are shocking. That one probably shook me more than any, especially in the climate now where we're seeing, major pastors who are stepping down from ministry. And I'm not going to go into all of that, but it's just this idea that there is a lot of hurt, a lot of pain. And that's so 40%, that's the ones that admit it.
Yeah. That's the ones that said it in the survey.
Yeah, that actually would say it.
Would acknowledge it.
And so the statistics most likely are even higher.
Yeah.
That's frightening.
Yeah. And it goes back, you said it earlier, 50% of pastors' marriages in divorce, no different than the world.
It's just exactly like the world.
And then I want to say this, and we'll get to our last point, is that we really stress. And this one thing we're pushing churches, we're meeting with boards at pastor to pastor of churches. And if your church needs us to step in with you and help you maneuver this, we'll be happy to. But we're doing it with several churches that the budget has to put in for the welfare of the pastor.
And the pastor's wife.
And the wife and his family.
Yes.
That, once a quarter, your pastor, wife, family, and sometimes just the pastor and wife alone, somebody help with the kids, that 2 nights away, it could be local, hour away, but enough to get the city in the rearview mirror.
Right, yeah.
And get away for 2 nights and 3 days, all on the church, not out of the pocket of the pastor and his family and his budget, but the church make it part of their mission budget for the wellness. We pay mortgages, we pay utilities, we pay upkeep, we pay maintenance for a building, and we spend nothing for the maintenance of the pastor and his family. And we have to balance that back out. And so if we want our pastor to be healthy, his family to be healthy, his marriage to be healthy, there has to be an investment from the church into that pastor. It should not have to come out of his dollar. The church needs to see the importance of that and make sure that the pastor, his marriage, and his family is being ministered to. It's vital today.
Right, but the pastor only works on Wednesdays and Sundays. So
he's golfing all them other days. And
they
someone
have
asked
on their
me,
mind at all.
That's right.
I've been asked this so many times in ministry, what's it like to be a pastor? What's a pastor like? And whatever amount you got in your church.
Yeah.
If you got 500, you got 50. I go, you're a parent, right? How many kids you got? 2? Yeah. Okay, make that 50. Make that 500. Make that 1,000. Well, but they're adults. Well, every adult acts like a child when they're sick. Yeah. Every adult. We're in a recliner. Honey, can you get me? And so I've got 1,000 kids out there. There may be adults right now, but when they're hurting, they become kids, and I'm a spiritual father to them. And I got a wife that's a spiritual mother to them, and we're supposed to help make them better. That's those stops you make from place to place, going, God, help us, give us wisdom, give us guidance, and it never stops. We have the only occupation in the world that has no off switch.
Right, and then
then
you hit that point of compassion fatigue because you're entering into everybody else's pain. You're feeling it. It weighs on you, and as soon as you kind of get one fire put out, there's another fire, and so it's an ongoing thing that's draining your emotions, draining your joy, and all of that. That's a tough place to be in for marriages, for the individuals, the pastor, the pastor's wife.
Right. Well, I just want to reiterate what you said, Dan, about wherever this self-care comes from. But if the pastor and his wife can have a time of refreshing, these things are so much, I wouldn't say easier, but better to handle when you feel rested and you're not feeling completely burned out. You're coming from a whole different place. And so God gives us extra measure of strength, that's for sure too. But because the demands are so great, we really do, even as among ourselves, need to be mindful that we get times of refreshing so that we can do what God's called us to do.
Right.
Yeah. No, no question. I'm sorry.
No, it doesn't hurt. Yeah, we do this sometimes. We also get together like you all. We go out. We call it our date night, and sometimes the kids want to hang out too, the grown kids of ours. But anyway, we have times that we have time alone, and all that. So I think that's really huge, along with each other. One of the things I did want to say, sometimes men and marriages, the husbands or wife don't want to do this. But one of the things also that I can say in our family is, and that it might help pastors' wives too, is getting their time alone. There has been times when I was I remember specifically sitting at a Target, and I called him up. I said, I got to get out of here. And he goes, okay, whatever you feel like you need to do. It wasn't to go see somebody or do some weird thing. It was because I needed a break. And he understood that. And I think that that's another thing. Sometimes you just need a break for a day or a night to yourself. I didn't go home. I didn't pack anything. Luckily, I had just maybe a toothbrush and toothpaste, those kinds of things in the trunk. And I got there and went shopping. But I'm just saying all that to say that sometimes I think the couples need to be aware, in any really couples, and then you talk about ministry and the things that come on that and the stress. Let that wife get away a minute if she has somewhere to go, with a friend or herself. Just take a breath and get a different perspective. The same goes for me. He goes away. He hunts every year. If he needs to go away for the day, whatever you need. And then, obviously, I'm going to trust what he's doing, and same with him with me. So sometimes those things help as well. And some marriages just think, oh my gosh, I need you by my side every minute. And I'm just like, I just had to make that face. I'm like, what? He's not like that. So we have our times together, but sometimes you just need space too.
I like that you have a ready bag so that you can just get away at any moment.
I just always wondered.
I've had enough of him. I've got to get up and get up on my
I haven't said anything out loud, but since she brought it up, I always wondered, every time she calls me and says, I need to get away. Or you come about the house, no, I got what I need.
She just happens to have it.
Yeah, I think this is pre-planned,
I might have got up feeling that way that morning.
Now you're busted. I really needed this today. Going to help our marriage and my budget. But no, it's so true. We're going to wrap. When we were younger in ministry, our Friday night was our date night, and our kids knew. As they got older, don't ask to come with us. When grandkids come along, you say yes.
Oh yeah.
But when we were with just our kids, date night was our night. And we didn't ask other couples to join us. We just wanted to have our time. And I think it's very, very important for couples to make sure that in the midst of all the chaos, that you take time for each other. And in wrapping up, we want to just say, here at Pastor to Pastor, we care.
Yes.
We care deeply about not only your husband, we care about you. More than your church. We have a saying here, and at Pastor to Pastor, and at church here is God cares more about you than he does your gift.
Amen.
And I think sometimes in ministry we forget that, and we put the gift ahead of us and put all the importance on the gift. And in reality, God cares more about you as a pastor's wife and your husband as a pastor, and he cares about your church and how big it is and how well he preached and how good you operated as a wife. He cares about you as a person, and he wants you healthy, wants you happy. And we want to help with that journey, that you stay healthy and stay happy. So we want to say to the pastors, we're here for you. We want to say to the pastors' wives, we're equally here for you. And if you need someone to talk to, pastors' wives, we have wives ready to help, ready to talk to you. Pastors, we're here. We got a team ready to reach out, be available for you. And as a couple, family, we're ready. We're here for you. You can no longer say, I had nowhere to go.
That's right.
Can no longer say. How do they reach us, Pastor?
So there's a lot of resources that you can find on our Pastor to Pastor website. It's pastortopastor.life, L-I-F-E. And it's the 2 is a T-O, not a 2. Right. pastortopastor.life. You can find information there. You can go to Pastor to Pastor on Instagram, on YouTube, and on Facebook. And there's just all kinds of resources on our website. Everything from the blog post. There's more information. If you want more information on what we've just talked about, you can find it on our blog post there. There's information on how you can contact us. And let's just say you're not alone. You are not alone. You may feel alone, whether you're a pastor, whether you're a pastor's wife, you may feel alone, but there's people that care about you. And listen, these are not people that don't know what you're going through. We've been there. We've walked through it. We've walked through it with lots of other pastors and other pastors' wives, and there's hope on the other side.